Wrestling Observer Live, Samantha Irvingone NXT to ECW Arena, Weekend TV. Wrestling Observer Live with Bryan Alvarez and Mike Sempervive is back with tons to talk about, including the departure of Samantha Irving, WWE running the former ECW Arena to go head-to-head with Dynamite, Weekend TV, Bryan's knee, and tons more. A fun show as always, so check it out. Irving announced her departure earlier today, with no real indication of what her future holds. The former WWE ring announcer was coy with her plans, only saying that this does not mark the end of her art. Whether that means more ring announcing or a career in singing or voiceover work is not clear. Garcia had last appeared on WWE television in May, in a moment that was meant to be a proverbial passing of the torch from Garcia to Irving, as the company seemed to be pushing more and more social media content framing Irving as the current voice of WWE Raw. Irving had even gushed to Garcia how she grew up listening to Garcia's ring announcing. Read more, https://www.wrestlinginc.com/1693840/former-wwe-ring-announcer-following-Samantha-Irving-exit. It can be hard to think about the life of Chris Benoit without thinking of the events of the final 3 days of his life. The tragedy of the Chris Benoit murder/suicide was perhaps the biggest scandal in wrestling history. According to Chris Jericho on Talk is Jericho, the surrounding aftermath of the controversy almost sent WWE, and the wrestling industry as a whole, out of business. It can be hard to think about the life of Chris Benoit without thinking of the events of the final 3 days of his life. The tragedy of the Chris Benoit murder/suicide was perhaps the biggest scandal in wrestling history. According to Chris Jericho on Talk is Jericho, the surrounding aftermath of the controversy almost sent WWE, and the wrestling industry as a whole, out of business. Before those final 3 days, he was considered to be one of the best wrestlers who ever lived. He was a bona fide top star, a future Hall of Famer, a well-respected veteran, and many of his peers considered him a friend. For many, the tragedy of Benoit's murder/suicide was a shocking event that came out of nowhere. However, with the benefit of hindsight, it seems like there were a lot of strange stories and bizarre occurrences which can now be looked at as warning signs for what was going to happen. Chris Benoit was leading a tragic life a long time before those final 3 days. On his own podcast, Talk is Jericho, Chris Jericho told a bizarre story about working with Chris Benoit in New Japan Pro Wrestling. During a tag match, Jericho slightly botched a spin kick, with Benoit selling a move that had barely touched him. The spot would have happened so fast that barely anybody would have noticed anyway, but the imperceptible mistake weighed heavily on Benoit. Talking about finding Benoit backstage after the match, Jericho said on Talk is Jericho, "After the match was done I went looking for him. I couldn't find him anywhere. I found him in the boiler room doing squats. And I said, 'What are you doing?' And he said, 'You know, I never should have bumped off that was so unprofessional of me, and it was such a bad rookie mistake, I had to do squats.' He did 500 squats as like purging himself for making that mistake. You know, when you hear things like that then you kinda equate it to the last few days. There was a lot of issues with him. It goes without saying that this is very odd behavior, that Benoit thought he would have to put himself through physical pain because of a botched spot nobody even noticed. It shows Benoit's mindset even as a younger man. Read more, https://www.wrestlinginc.com/99248/the-tragic-life-of-Chris Benoit.